He neither saved himself nor called upon the angels. He offered no resistance, and this is what confused the darkness. Everything on earth was quiet. The tomb was sealed, the disciples were in fear, but was nothing really happening? This is the question that history often overlooks, because man believes only what his eyes see, and on that first day, the eyes saw nothing. But the invisible world is always far more active than the visible. Jesus had said, "Just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." On the first day, the heart of the earth was sealed, and something was happening within. But the disciples did not know this. They only knew that their master was dead. For them, this first day was the greatest test of faith, because faith is easy when miracles are visible. But when everything is silent, faith becomes a heavy burden. And that is why the first day is the most difficult. No joy of resurrection, no clamor of the crucifixion. Just waiting, a waiting that breaks the spirit. And perhaps this was the day when heaven witnessed human pain most closely, because Jesus had not only tasted death, but also the waiting without an answer. The first day was ending, the sun was setting, the tomb was still sealed, and the world still thought that death had triumphed. But darkness did not know that its greatest illusion had been born right there. The second Days is the day that is not mentioned in celebrations, on which no songs are sung, and which history often silently passes over. But this was the day when darkness was most complacent. There was a Sabbath silence in Jerusalem. The streets were quiet. The doors were closed and people had confined themselves within religious rules. The outside world was still, but a storm was raging within. Jesus' tomb was still sealed. The stone was in its place. The Roman guard was still vigilant. No miracles. No heavenly signs. The second day was even heavier than the first, because at least on the first day there was the intensity of the shock. There were tears, there were screams, the pain was pouring out. But the next day, the pain settled deep inside. For the disciples, this day was unbearable. They couldn't even cry anymore. They were simply empty. Peter kept reliving the moment when his eyes met Jesus. That look on the cross, devoid of accusation or anger. Just a silent acceptance, and that's what was breaking Peter. If Jesus had rebuked him, if he had condemned him, perhaps Peter could have borne his guilt. But that look only intensified his burden. John sat by the window. He was looking outside, but in reality he was looking inward. He had spent 3 years of his life with Jesus, every day, every step of the way, and now he had no direction. Mary Magdalene was no longer shedding tears, because sometimes grief is so profound that even tears are afraid to fall. Her mind kept asking the same question: if he was truly the Messiah, why did all this happen? And this is the question that is repeated in every age. Meanwhile, in the darkness, there was a strange kind of peace. The evil forces felt that the work was complete. The one who had revealed the truth, who had come as the light, was now confined to the tomb. For them, this was the ultimate victory, because they hadn't defeated Jesus with a sword. They had had him killed by the crowd, by the religious leaders, and by the system. And now there was no resistance. Heaven too was silent. This is what reassured them the most. Because when heaven is silent, darkness believes it has won. But history has shown many times that the most dangerous moment is when the enemy becomes complacent. The second day was the height of waiting, no hope, no sign. The tomb was sealed, and time moved slowly. But this was the day when Jesus' words were becoming most meaningful. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. The second day was the day the seed was in the soil. From the outside, nothing seemed to be happening, but inside, everything was being prepared. The disciples didn't know this. The world didn't know this. And perhaps that's why the second day is the most overlooked. Because it's the time when God works, but man cannot see it. It's the time when promises seem most impossible before they are fulfilled. The tomb was still sealed, and darkness was utterly confident. Nothing would happen now. But it didn't know that this was its greatest delusion. Because the third day was not far off, and on the third day, history was to be rewritten. The third day that began without any fanfare. No trumpets sounded, no announcements were made. Just the first faint light of dawn. Jerusalem, was still asleep. The streets were quiet. The air was cool, and near that tomb where death had claimed its greatest victory, something was about to happen. The tomb was still sealed. The stone was in place. The Roman soldiers were there. They were tired, drowsy, and completely at ease, for to them it was just guarding a dead body. But they didn't know who they were guarding. As that fine line between darkness and light began to emerge, the earth trembled. It wasn't the same kind of tremor as at Golgotha. This was something else, as if creation itself was holding its breath and watching. And then an angular being beyond human comprehension appeared. His appearance was like lightning. His clothes were as white as snow. He descended near the tomb. The stone, which was immovable for men, was nothing to him. In an instant, the stone rolled away. The ground shook, and the Roman soldiery became like dead men from fear. They couldn't fight. They couldn't run, because it wasn't a battle against human power, and the tomb was empty. Jesus' body wasn't there. It hadn't been stolen or removed. It simply wasn't there. And that was the moment when death was defeated. At that same time, Mary Magdalene and some other women were approaching the tomb. They were in sorrow. They were weeping. They were wondering, who will roll away the stone? Little did they know that the stone wouldn't need to be rolled away, but had already been moved. As they drew near, they saw the tomb open. Their steps faltered. Fear, confusion, and a new kind of unease. They peered inside. Empty, only the burial cloths remained neatly folded. And then a voice, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" They turned. An angel. "He is not here. He has risen." Words that change history. Words that defy all darkness. Jesus was alive, but there was no immediate rejoicing, because the resurrection doesn't reveal itself immediately. It first provides proof. The women ran and told the disciples, but they didn't believe them, because sometimes the best news is the hardest to accept. The tomb was empty, and this was a fact that no one could deny. The Roman soldiers had seen it. The chief priests knew it too. But suppressing the truth wasn't easy. So the story was changed. The disciples stole the body. But one question remained: if they were hiding in fear, how could they have done this in front of the soldiers? The third day was no longer just a date. It was the day when the final boundary of death was broken. When darkness realized it had made its greatest mistake, because it had touched the one who was life itself. And the grave can never hold back life. Jesus was alive. But the story doesn't end there, because the resurrection wasn't limited to simply coming out of the tomb. He was going to meet them. He was going to speak. He was going to show them that death had truly been defeated. The tomb was empty, but Jerusalem was still sleeping. The greatest event in history had unfolded peacefully, and most people were still unaware. Mary Magdalene was standing outside the tomb. The other women had left with the message, but Mary couldn't leave because her heart wouldn't let her. Tears streamed down her face. She bent down and looked into the tomb again. It was empty. Just then, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw a man standing there. He was dressed in ordinary clothes, with no radiance, no divine light. He looked like an ordinary man. She thought he must be the gardener. She said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." She didn't know who she was talking to. And then, a single word, just one word: Mary. Her world changed in that instant, because no one spoke her name the way Jesus did. She trembled. Her eyes opened. Her heart recognized him. Rabboni, teacher. Jesus was alive, but he wasn't quite as she remembered him. He was there, and yet different. His voice still held the same compassion, but there was a new firmness in it. Jesus said, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." And then he gave her a task. "Go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary ran. She was the woman who had once been possessed by 7 demons. She was the one whom society had scorned. And now she was the first witness of the resurrection. Jesus didn't choose the high priests first, not the kings, not the Roman officials. He chose a broken heart. Because the resurrection is not revealed through power, but through relationship. Meanwhile, the disciples were still hiding behind locked doors. Mary arrived. Her breath was quick. There was fire in her eyes. "I have seen the Lord." But silence fell over the room. No one believed her, because fear was still greater than faith. But now the story had changed. Because Jesus didn't appear on a stage. He was calling out names, and that's what sets this resurrection apart from history. Because it wasn't just an event. It was a calling for Mary, for Peter, for John, and for every broken person today. Jesus was alive, but he didn't come to the crowd. He came to the one who was weeping, because the resurrection is always recognized amidst tears. The doors were locked, the bolts were fastened, the windows were covered, and fear breathed within the room. Jesus' disciples were together, yet distant from one another. Someone had lit a lamp. Its faint light flickered on the walls. At every sound they tensed. What if they were looking for us too? What if the next crucifixion is ours? The fear wasn't just outside. It had settled within them. They had heard Mary Magdalene's words, "I have seen the Lord." But believing wasn't easy. Because their eyes had seen the cross, they had seen death, and their minds were still stuck there. And then something happened. No door opened, no bolt moved. But he was standing there in the middle of the room. Jesus without a sound, without a word, warning. At his mere presence, the disciples recoiled in fear. Some thought it was a ghost, for when fear is deep, even a miracle can seem terrifying. Jesus said, "Peace be with you," the same words he had spoken before the crucifixion. But now they held a new death. He showed them his hands. He showed them the wound in his side. The wounds were still there, but they were not bleeding. This body had died and then come back to life. Jesus said, "Why are you afraid? Why do doubts arise in your hearts?" He knew they were broken. He knew that Peter was still trapped in his denial. He knew that they were all struggling with their guilt. But he did not condemn anyone. He chose forgiveness. Because the resurrection is not just about conquering death, but also about conquering fear. Jesus asked for food. He ate a piece of fish in front of them because he wanted to show them. He was not a spirit. He was alive. In the same room where fear had reigned, now stood peace, but one disciple was not there. Thomas was not present at that time. When the disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord," Thomas said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Thomas is often called the doubter. But the truth is, he was honest, he was broken, and Jesus is not angry with broken people. 8 days later, the doors were closed again, and he was there again. This time his gaze was directly on Thomas. "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side." And then he said, "Stop doubting and believe." Thomas was overwhelmed. He exclaimed, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." And that sentence transcended time, for it is being spoken to us today. Jesus came through closed doors because fear always closes doors, and the resurrection always comes without knocking. It was morning, the lake was calm. The air was gentle, and the sun was shining softly on the water. It was the same lake, the Sea of Galilee, the same place where everything had begun. Peter was standing there. He said, "I am going fishing." It was a simple sentence, but much was hidden within it. It was as if he were saying, "I am going back to where I came from." The other disciples went with him. They cast their nets all night but caught nothing. Not a single fish. Fatigue, disappointment, and an old feeling failure. As dawn broke, someone was standing on the shore. From a distance he called out, "Children, do you have anything to eat?" They said no. He said, "Cast your net on the right side." They did, and suddenly the net was full. So full that it was difficult to pull in. John recognized him. He whispered, "It is the Lord." Hearing this, Peter didn't hesitate. He pulled on his clothes and jumped into the lake. He swam toward the shore, for love runs fastest after failure. A fire was burning on the shore. Fish were being roasted and bread was laid out. The scene was strangely familiar. The fire was just like the fire by which Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, and now again, a fire. Jesus said, "Come and have breakfast." No one asked any questions because they all knew who he was. After breakfast, Jesus looked at Peter. He asked Simon, "Do you love me?" Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Then a second time, "Simon, do you love me?" Peter's voice was a little heavy. "Yes, Lord, you know." A third time, "Simon, do you love me?" Now Peter was broken, for the same question 3 times reminded him of his 3 denials. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said again, "Feed my sheep." Jesus didn't ask Peter a single question about his failure. He only asked about love, because restoration comes not from reminding, but from entrusting with faith. The fire that had once been a source of guilt now became a source of restoration, and Peter stood again. Jesus said to him, "Follow me." The same words were spoken that had been spoken at the beginning, because resurrection doesn't just restore life, it restores purpose. The lake was calm, but a storm had subsided within Peter, because love was greater than failure. 50 days after the cross, 50 days after the tomb, and 50 days after the resurrection testimony, Jerusalem was once again filled with people. It was the Feast of Pentecost. People from every direction, every language, every nation. And in an upper room, a few people were gathered, the same disciples, the same faces, but this time something was different. They weren't sitting behind locked doors in fear anymore. They were waiting. Jesus had told them to stay in Jerusalem until they received power from on high. They didn't know what that power would be like. They were simply obeying, and then suddenly from heaven, a soundless roar, like the sound of a mighty wind. The room shook, but there was no wind. And then fire, separate flames, like tongues of fire, rested on each of them. This wasn't the fire that burns. This was the fire that gives life, and in that moment, fear vanished. They began to speak in languages they had never learned, and the crowd standing outside listened. Each one heard in their own language. Some were amazed. Some mocked, saying, "These men are drunk." But Peter stood up. The same Peter who had once been afraid of a servant girl. The same Peter who had hidden on the night of the crucifixion. Now his voice didn't tremble. He said, "These men are not drunk." This is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. And then he proclaimed Jesus openly, without fear. He said, "The Jesus whom you crucified, God has made both Lord and Christ." That day, 30 people were transformed in a single day. Because when the Spirit descends, the crowd is transformed. These were the same people who had previously been hiding. Now they were in the streets, in the temples, in the homes. Fear was nowhere to be found, because fear had been consumed by the fire. Jesus' work was no longer limited. He was not confined to one body. He had become flesh. Pentecost was not just an event in every believer. It was proof that Jesus was truly alive, because dead people don't send the Holy Spirit. And now, those same disciples who had been broken for 3 days were shaking the world. This was the moment when the resurrection transformed from a story into a movement. The fire descended, and fear vanished. It wasn't a sudden departure. Jesus had prepared them. For 40 days he remained with them, speaking, explaining, and opening the scriptures. He filled them not with fear, but with purpose. He wasn't abandoning them, he was entrusting them with a mission. They were near the Mount of Olives, the very mountain where he had prayed, where he had sweated blood, where he had accepted his Father's will. Now that same mountain was about to witness another event. The disciples stood around him, still with questions in their minds. "Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?" Jesus smiled, for man always asks about time, and God always gives purpose. He said, "It is not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority. But you will receive power, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, and in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." This was not a political declaration, it was a global calling. And then he lifted his hands, the same hands that had once borne nails. Now those hands were giving a blessing, and as he blessed them, he began to ascend. Slowly, calmly, solemnly, the disciples watched. No noise, no storm, just him rising. And a cloud began to conceal him from their sight. The moment was strange. No sorrow, no fear, just a profound peace, as if they knew he was truly leaving, but not ending. They stood gazing into the sky, as if asking, "What now?" And then 2 men in white garments, sandals, said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." Those words were not just a prophecy, they were an assurance. Jesus was gone, but the story wasn't over. The disciples descended, not afraid. Their steps were now firm, for they understood that Jesus hadn't gone away, he had gone up, and from above, he was watching over everything. Their faith was no longer based on sight, it was now based on the Word. They knew he would return, and until then, they had work to do. The ascension was not an end, it was a transfer of responsibility. Jesus hadn't abandoned them, he had commissioned them. And that is why this scene is unique in history. Because no one leaves their followers so confidently unless they know their work will continue. Jesus knew this because his Spirit was now within them. He vanished into the clouds, but he appeared within them, and that was the moment the disciples ceased to be disciples. The sky was calm, but a movement had been born on earth. This story didn't begin and end in 3 days, because what came out of the tomb wasn't just a body. It was a truth, and truth is never confined by time. Jesus' death seemed like an end, his burial like a seal, and the waiting like a silence. But what truly happened in those 3 days was greater than history, because death had unleashed its full power, and yet was defeated. Jesus didn't just endure death, he transformed it. The cross, once a symbol of shame, became a symbol of hope. The tomb, considered the end, became the beginning, and the resurrection, which seemed impossible, became a reality. This story lives on because it's not just about then, it's about now. It's the story of every person who is broken, who lives in fear, who is burdened by guilt. Peter denied him but was restored. Thomas doubted but was transformed by faith. Mary wept and became the first witness, and the disciples, who had hidden, went out to change the world. Jesus never said his followers would never fall. He said, "I will be with them." This story lives on because it doesn't fear human weakness, it embraces it. Jesus' resurrection doesn't just say that he is alive. It also says that hope is alive, that forgiveness is possible, that love is the final word, and that no tomb is so deep that God's life cannot break through it. Even today, people are trapped in tombstones of fear, tombs of failure, tombs of the past. And the same question echoes today: is all this true? History didn't provide the answer, the tomb did, because it is empty. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life." He didn't just say it, he showed it, and that's why this story is still shaking the world 2,000 years later. Because in every age, someone is waiting for the third day. And in every age, God says that waiting is not in vain. Jesus left, but he didn't leave us alone. He ascended to heaven, but he sent the Holy Spirit. He disappeared from sight, but he appeared in faith, and he will come again. That is the assurance, that is the hope. 3 days are recorded in history, but their impact is eternal, because the resurrection didn't just happen then. It still happens today in every heart that accepts him. And that's why this story will never end. If you enjoyed this, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more.